My name is Brooke Ana, and I'm 22. For years, I lived in the shadows of my own family, working 3 jobs, sleeping in stairwells, scraping together tuition not just for myself, but secretly paying for my cousin's schooling too. They never asked how I managed. They never cared to notice. One night, my aunt saw me asleep outside a gas station, still in my grease-stained uniform, a paper cup at my side. She didn't wake me. She didn't say a word. But weeks later, when she was gone and her will was read aloud, that silent night became the reason everything changed. My parents and cousins came dressed for victory, certain the fortune was theirs. They mocked me for even showing up. But when the lawyer began reading, their smirks collapsed into rage. Every word pulled the ground from beneath them, and my name replaced theirs on everything they thought belonged to them. What followed wasn't just inheritance. It was a war inside my own bloodline, secrets exposed, power shifting, and a family tearing itself apart while I stood at the center. This isn't the story of what I lost. It's the story of how one night of truth unraveled them all. The night she found me, I wasn't supposed to be seen. That was the whole point of my double life, blending in, keeping my head down, working until my bones ached, and then vanishing into the shadows before anyone I knew could recognize me. But exhaustion doesn't negotiate. It hit me at 3 in the morning while I was folding up the cracked plastic chairs outside the gas station, my third shift of the day dragging itself toward dawn. I had slipped down onto the bench, still in my uniform that smelled faintly of oil and detergent, my sneakers patched with duct tape, and drifted into that half-sleep where the mind stays restless even as the body surrenders. I didn't hear the engine first. What pulled me back into awareness was the beam of headlights sweeping across the glass doors, washing over me in a glare that felt almost judgmental. My eyes blinked open, heavy, and through the blur I recognized the sleek outline of a black sedan rolling to a stop. When the driver's door opened, I froze. It was her. My Aunt Eleanor. Perfect hair, diamond earrings catching the streetlight, and a presence that always carried itself like the world bent to her timetable. She didn't say my name. She didn't even walk over right away. She stood by the car with one hand resting on the door frame, her eyes locked on me like she was watching a play she couldn't decide if she liked or despised. My chest tightened. In all the years of carefully hiding what I did, working until sunrise, borrowing hours of sleep in stairwells or empty buses, surviving on instant noodles while quietly sending money for my cousin's private school fees, this was the one person I didn't want witnessing it. I sat up quickly, fumbling with my bag, muttering something about being on break. She didn't answer. The silence stretched until it pressed against my ribs, and when I dared to meet her gaze, I saw something unguarded flicker there. Not pity. Not scorn. Something harder to read. She finally walked closer, her heels tapping against the cracked pavement, and for a moment I thought she was about to interrogate me. But she only stopped a few feet away, studying the crumpled coffee cup beside me, the smudges under my eyes, the way my shoulders sagged from carrying too much weight. I opened my mouth to explain. About college tuition, about how my parents' debts had left me covering their children's schooling, about how no one had offered me a safety net. But the words caught in my throat. She already knew, or at least she was piecing it together. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and the night's cold, and in that suspended silence I realized she wasn't going to break it. She just looked at me, like someone memorizing the shape of a truth they had overlooked too long. Then, without saying a word, she turned back to her car, slipped behind the wheel, and drove away. I sat there long after her taillights vanished, my heart pounding as if I'd been caught stealing something. Weeks later, the house on Brookhaven Lane was thick with perfume, leather briefcases, and the sound of voices sharpened by greed. My parents were dressed like they were attending a gala, my cousins adjusting their silk ties and polished shoes, whispering their predictions about what Aunt Eleanor had left behind. They didn't see me at first, sitting in the corner, my thrift store dress plain against their luxury. When they did, they smirked. One cousin muttered, loud enough for the room to hear, "Guess she came to learn what nothing looks like." The lawyer's voice cut through the tension, calm, almost clinical, as he unfolded the stack of papers. But the first words weren't his. They were hers. My aunt's voice, carefully arranged in writing, deliberate in every phrase. To my family, I leave not only what I built, but the truth of what I saw. The room quieted. My mother leaned forward. My cousins exchanged glances, expecting the praise they thought they deserved. Then he read the part that made the air shift. Several weeks ago, I found myself driving late at night. Outside a gas station, on a cracked bench, I saw my niece asleep. Still in her work uniform, exhaustion clinging to her, an empty cup at her side. I didn't wake her. I didn't speak. I only watched long enough to understand what I had refused to see before. She has carried a weight none of you would ever lift. She has paid for her own education, and she has paid for yours. She has worked until her body gave out, while you mocked her for having less. My cousin stiffened, their confidence cracking. My father coughed into his fist, eyes darting toward me. The lawyer's tone stayed steady, but the words grew sharper. She has shown sacrifice, discipline, and a sense of responsibility absent in the rest of you. And because of this, everything I leave behind will not be scattered among those who squander. It will go to the one person who has already proven she knows the value of what she earns. It will go to her. My name, spoken aloud, written in ink, claimed in front of them all. The room erupted. My mother's voice shot up, demanding the papers be read again. My cousins slammed their palms against the table, their polished composure collapsing into outrage. One shouted that it had to be a mistake, another swore they'd contested in court. My father's face turned red, veins rising in his temples as he argued about fairness. I didn't move. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, the echo of that night at the gas station filling my head. Her silent gaze. The moment she chose not to expose me, but to remember me. I understood then. She had been writing this ending the second she drove away. The chaos didn't die down after the will reading. If anything, it ignited something uglier. My cousins stormed out first, muttering about lawyers and loopholes, their polished shoes clicking hard against the marble floor. My parents stayed behind, demanding explanations, as though the attorney had personally betrayed them. I walked out quietly, feeling their stares burn into my back, but I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't need to. Their outrage followed me like smoke. 2 days later, the phone call started. At first, it was my mother's voice, unusually soft, asking if we could meet for coffee. When I refused, the softness cracked, and she shifted to guilt, reminding me of everything she had ever done for me. By the third call, it was shouting. I silenced the phone. Then came my cousins, slipping notes into my mailbox, some pretending to apologize, others not even bothering to hide the threats. They wanted access, influence, a share of something they had counted on for themselves. I kept replaying the lawyer's words in my head, the way my aunt had written them so carefully. She had known this would happen. She had left me everything not just to give me security, but to force me into a position where I couldn't be ignored. That realization steadied me more than anything else. The first time I returned to the Brookhaven estate, the house was colder without her, though every chandelier still glittered, and the walls were lined with paintings worth more than my old yearly salary. Staff nodded politely as I walked in, unsure if they should treat me like an intruder or the new owner. I could feel my cousin's presence even in their absence, their laughter lingering in the hallways where they had grown comfortable, assuming it would always belong to them. Now it was mine. I sat in her study, the same room where she must have written her will, and opened the desk drawers. She had left no personal letters, no long explanations. Only financial ledgers, investment notes, and neatly signed instructions that now carried my authority. She had trusted me not with words, but with control. I let the silence of that room sink into me until I could breathe steadily again. Of course, my family didn't take my new role quietly. At dinner tables and social clubs, they spread whispers about how ungrateful I was, how I had tricked her in her last days, how she must have been manipulated. I caught fragments of their gossip through mutual acquaintances, each rumor sharper than the last. But when I walked into those same rooms, their voices lowered, their eyes pretending not to track me. They wanted me gone, yet they couldn't deny the fact that my aunt had chosen me over them. The first open confrontation came a week later. My cousin Daniel cornered me outside the estate gates, his car blocking my path as I stepped onto the sidewalk. He leaned out, tie loosened, his polished composure cracked with bitterness. "She owed us, not you," he hissed, gripping the steering wheel tight. "You think you earned this? You were a charity case. That's all you ever were." I didn't flinch. I met his glare and answered evenly. "If you really believed that, she would have written your name instead of mine." For the first time in our lives, he didn't have a comeback. He slammed the car door and drove off, tires screeching against the pavement. The weeks after Daniel cornered me felt like living in a storm cloud waiting to break. The estate was mine legally, but ownership meant little when the people circling it had nothing to lose. My parents and cousins had built their lives on the expectation of wealth that no longer belonged to them, and every day their desperation sharpened. They weren't just mourning Eleanor, they were mourning the futures they believed she owed them. The first real blow came in the form of a lawsuit. My uncle, though never close to her, filed papers contesting the will on grounds of mental instability. He claimed Eleanor hadn't been in her right mind when she wrote it, that she must have been manipulated. My cousins swore they would testify. My parents backed the story, pretending to be shocked that she would leave me everything. I walked into the courtroom on the first day and felt their eyes stab me like knives, but I kept my head straight. The judge read the will in its entirety again, noting Eleanor's precise wording, her clear instructions, and the fact that multiple witnesses had verified her state of mind. The lawyer who had been with her for 20 years spoke with authority, dismantling every accusation. When the opposing side tried to smear me, the judge cut them off. In less than an hour, the case was dismissed. I left the courthouse without glancing back at the family, though I could hear their whispers hissing behind me like broken gas lines. They didn't stop. If anything, the loss pushed them further. They turned to public humiliation. At dinners, they painted me as a thief, an opportunist, someone who had schemed her way into fortune. They spread their story to anyone willing to listen. Old friends began to avoid me. Even some colleagues at my part-time jobs, the ones I hadn't yet left behind, started looking at me differently. But the more they tried to turn the world against me, the more hollow their attacks sounded. Everyone could see the bitterness underneath. I decided then I wouldn't fight them with anger. That was what they wanted, a public war. Instead, I stepped into Eleanor's role with quiet precision. I attended board meetings of the companies she had invested in. I learned the estate's operations, speaking directly with the staff, treating them with the respect my cousins had never given. I didn't show off, didn't gloat, didn't confront. I worked, just as I always had. Only now the stage was larger. The turning point came at a charity gala Eleanor had supported for years. It was my first time attending, and when I walked in, every head turned. My parents were already there, dressed to impress, trying to maintain their place in that world. My cousins flanked them, laughing too loudly, pretending nothing had changed. When the director of the foundation introduced me as the primary benefactor of Eleanor's trust, the room applauded. The applause wasn't for them. I caught my mother's eyes across the hall. She smiled, but it didn't reach her face. My father looked away, his jaw set. My cousins glared openly, their resentment finally unmasked. I understood in that moment that they weren't just angry at the loss of money. They were furious because I had taken the place they thought only belonged to them. Their final attempt came not long after. Late one evening, as I left the estate office, I found them waiting in the driveway, my parents and all three cousins. Their voices rose before I had even reached the steps. "You think this is over?" my father shouted. "This isn't yours." She was confused. She was manipulated. "We won't let you destroy our family." Daniel stepped closer, his fists clenched. "Give it back before we take it ourselves." I stood at the top of the steps, the night air sharp, the house lights glowing behind me. For a long moment, I let their threats echo. Then I answered clearly, each word steady. "You had years of her money, her home, her patience, and you wasted it. She chose me because I never asked for anything. I earned everything I have, even before she left me this. You can scream, you can lie, you can fight, but you'll never change the truth, she wrote down. Silence fell over them. My mother tried to speak, but the sound caught in her throat. My cousins shifted, restless, knowing the fight was slipping from their hands. My father's face hardened, but there was no weapon left to use. They realized it at the same time I did. It was finished. They left without another word. One by one, their cars pulled away, their silhouettes swallowed by the dark. I stood there until the sound of engines faded completely. The next morning, I walked through the estate alone. Sunlight cut across the marble floors, and for the first time, the house felt settled. No more whispers in the halls, no more shadows waiting at the door. Just stillness. I thought of Eleanor, of that night at the gas station when she had watched me sleep, and how she must have decided then that I was the only one who would understand what it meant to carry everything she left behind. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. The life I had built on exhaustion and sacrifice had prepared me for this moment. Not to flaunt it, not to punish them, but to keep moving forward. By the end of that week, I resigned from all 3 jobs. I finished paying off my tuition, and I sent the last transfer for my cousin's school fees. They would never know, and I didn't need them to. I did it because it was right, not because I owed them anything. The estate was mine now, and so was the responsibility that came with it. My family would go on resenting me, but they could no longer touch what Eleanor had placed in my hands. She had seen me when no one else had cared to look, and she had trusted me with her legacy. That trust was the final word, the only one that mattered. And as the doors of Brookhaven closed behind me that evening, I knew the story was over. Not with noise, not with chaos, but with the quiet certainty that I had survived them all.